that both of the series are going to change as of today. We completed them. We didn't leave them. We actually completed them, and I hope that there was some value to you in both of those series. So today, we're in class, we're going to start a whole new series. Some of you may even have heard of this, the Shepherd's Song. It's a set of studies that look at David and what has happened in his life that is so applicable to our own. So before we begin, I've asked two of our stalwarts in class to read the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel. If you guys could turn there yourselves, I think it would be of value to you. So,
Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him for being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, because I have chosen a king for myself among his sons." But Samuel said, "How can I go? When Saul hears about this, he will kill me." But the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' And you shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you." So Samuel did what the Lord told him, and he came to Bethlehem. When the elders of the city came trembling to meet him, and said, "Do you come in peace?" And he said, "In peace, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." He also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, Surely the Lord's anointed is standing before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance, or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God does not see as man sees, since man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass before Samuel. But he said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Next, Jesse had Shammah pass by, and he said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." So Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Are these all the boys?" And he said, "The youngest is still left, but behold, he is tending the sheep." So Samuel said to Jesse, "Send word and bring him, for we will not take our places at the table until he comes here." So he sent word and brought him in. Now he was reddish with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel sent out and went to Ramah.
Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the harp. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes upon you, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his attendants, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." One of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man. and the Lord is with him. Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me your son David, who is with the sheep. So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. When David came to Saul and entered his service, David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. Then Saul sent the word to Jesse, saying, Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him. Whenever the Spirit from God came upon Saul, David would take his harp and play. Then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him.
This is I don't know if you saw several things in there you may not have seen before. I mentioned this earlier that I've always looked at Samuel as kind of a hero. You know, his people looked at him that way as well. But the same thing that happened with Moses just then happened with Samuel. Samuel says, "You want to send me there, and he'll kill me?" He was just basically saying, "You got the wrong guy. You need to look for some other body." And it's sort of like, no, no, it's you, Samuel. And let me tell you how I think we can get this done without you dying. And so he gave him some strategies, a little bit of subterfuge and all of that, but he did. The second thing about Samuel is, can you possibly put yourself in Samuel's shoes when he was standing before Jesse and his family, being told that, look, that this is going to come from this guy's family. And he got to the third or fourth one, and each one. Do you think he might have been getting a little antsy? I would have been. It's sort of like, are you sure it's the right Jesse? Maybe you made a mistake. So I'm sure Samuel was getting a little uneasy, kind of like restless, and he finally asked the right question. And that was, well, do you have any other body? And it's sort of like, well, yes, we do. However, he's the youngest. And so one of the other things that was interesting to me is this repeatedly was said, don't look at that guy by who he looks like or whatever. And yet, what did they say about David? You know, it's sort of like, well, he was easy to look at. You know, that type of thing. It's almost like we can't get past that, but God wants us to try, especially to look at the heart and not the cover of the book. And yet, I'm not sure they got past it just based on this. So that's a good place to start this study. Called the Shepherd's Song. Sheep could not report or even document a performance review for David as a shepherd. There was nobody looking after him. And you know, in fact, in the face of danger, David could have just as well fled. No one would have known, but he didn't, because he had that heart that God was looking for. So, as Samuel goes through this, we need to know a little bit about when this happened. So this is about 1049 before Christ, BC. Well, that's pretty long, pretty far back there, right? And Israel had not really grown into its shoes. It was basically an overgrown band of nomads. Their weapons were poor, they were bronze. One of the problems with bronze is twofold when you want to make edged weapons. One, it's very heavy compared to steel. And two, it won't keep an edge. Bronze axes, bronze swords, bronze spears required constant sharpening. It just wasn't. The other thing is it was more brittle than steel, so easily broken in battle. So it's a little bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight, usually in their skirmishes with the surrounding Canaanites. So that's a problem. That's desolate. But in spite of all that, what Israel was most concerned about wasn't their weapons. It was, we need a king. To be a respectable nation, we need a king. They were warned that no, you don't. You need to follow God. But they continued to want a king, and they wanted him to look like a king. And they got it, King Solomon. So he fit their criteria. Does this guy look like a king? Does he have a bearing of a king? Et cetera, et cetera. And so they got him. He was ambitious, but he was insecure and paranoid. He was psychotic and murderous. Well, you got your king. Tough, really tough situation for the Israelites. And God had told them that, look, he told them the reasons you guys don't need a king. First of all, I should be your king, Lord God Jehovah. Secondly, you're not going to like it. You're not going to like what a king does. They got it. But during his reign, because of all these things, his ambitiousness, his insecurity, and his psychotic breaks and murders, Saul's heart turned ugly. And God rejected him because of that. God sent Samuel to find Saul's replacement. A king who would not just look the part, but would have the heart after God's own. But even Samuel was still suffering from the look the part game. He went through 7 of Jesse's sons, thinking, surely this guy, when he got to the 6th one, I know he was saying, surely this is it. It's the one we've been looking for. And it's sort of like, nope. And he was forced out of desperation to ask, do you have any other sons? And why, yes. He's the youngest. He's out tending sheep. Does that strike you as interesting? The youngest in that society was the least important to the family. That's unfortunate because often the youngest in the family is the one who succeeds the most and achieves the most. Possibly because he's seen all the mistakes the earlier ones made, the earlier versions made, and they can just kind of like, yep, I dodged that one. So interesting that this would go against every cultural thinking about birth order at that time. In fact, so who at that point in time who was put in charge of shepherding typically, especially in wealthier families? Who was it? It was a servant. So just an even more thumb on the scale against David is sort of like, I'm not going to waste any of my good servants on this. Jesse was going to say, David, just get out there and take the sheep. But God had a plan, and his role as a shepherd in many ways formed him up. Being the youngest isn't easy, but in many cases today in our culture, the youngest is usually the one that takes care of the parents. Usually the one that steps up, does this, does that. It's interesting how cultural norms can change back and forth. But I would say looking down on the youngest is a bad idea. You may miss something really important. Interestingly enough, David had not even been invited to the feast. Can you imagine that? Just, yeah, you stay out with the sheep. The rest of us are going to have a feast and visit with Samuel, who we appreciate, etc., etc. He didn't even know there was a feast going on. He was just with the sheep. They were happy about that. That's tough. He hadn't been invited, and yet, do you know what? He ended up being the guest of honor. God has a very interesting way of turning the tables around, despite what the cultural norms are. I like that. It's we have sort of an interesting way of judging people even in our culture today, and it has more to do with what someone may look like, their physique, all these different things. Uh, we haven't learned much, really, in the way we judge people. We need to be a little bit careful about that. Certainly, Samuel was surprised, and so was everyone else when he became that guest of honor at that feast. And he was probably shocked. Can you imagine one of the servants running out and says, "You got to come back and be in your father's house. We're having a feast. You need to be there." And David's looking around. He's looking at the sheep. It's kind of like, feast? No, nobody told me. It's like, well, we're telling you now. Pack up your gear and get back to the house. So I'm sure David was very puzzled by that as well. Does this resonate with you? Yeah, me too.
He was a little guy too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was certainly not as stately and tall as some of his brothers. That's why later on he everybody was laughing when he went to slay Goliath. Yeah, absolutely. Which was to come, by the way.
Somewhere I read that the sheep in that area were raised to be taken to Jerusalem for their sacrifices.
Many.
So his job was doing the job that was given his group.
Right.
And doing that job apparently grew his heart. He was not afraid.
Right.
The elders were afraid, who were in charge of the
Right. Absolutely.
whole areas.
That-
That is where he grew his heart.
Yes.
He was doing the work that needed to be done for God.
Yes, that, and something else that we'll look at carefully here too. That, what you said is absolutely true. But the 40 years after that Saul clung tenaciously to his throne. 40 years. And in those 40 years, the early part, yes, he played the harp for Saul and became friends with Jonathan and a whole host of different things like that. But during that period of time, Saul increasingly began to view him as a threat, especially when he learned that David had been anointed God's own. And from that point on, Saul chased him. So the latter part, probably for nearly 20, maybe another 10, but 10 to 20 years, he was running for his life. He was running to enemies of Israel to escape Saul, who had, what a miserable existence, all kinds of different things. So between his time in the wilderness and proving himself courageous against wild animals that most of the warriors wouldn't touch, things like that. That 40 years between what we are looking at today and when David finally took the throne, those were formative, very formative. So I can't imagine how David could be as patient as he was, except that he didn't have much choice. Things beset him that none of us could have imagined. And I'm sure, I guess human nature would have said, "Thought you, God. I thought you anointed me as your own. When is this going to happen? And will I live through it that time?" So there's a lot going on with David that we could certainly look at. One is that he, throughout the things in his life, had the heart to go on, no matter what it was. He had the heart to go on. In this case, he had the heart to literally struggle through 40 years of difficulties before he even took the throne. I know that would be disappointing. I think it was probably even disappointing to Samuel because you said you were going to choose him, and it's sort of like, what are you going to do? Are you going to put him on the throne or not? And for 40 years, the answer was no. And I think God had in his infinite wisdom the right to put David through the hammer, the tongue, the file, and the anvil. It's sort of like David was forged during those 40 years to be who he ended up being for Israel. Probably no other warrior could compare. Closest in my mind might be Joshua. But no warrior in the history of Israel compared to David. So, the youngest, the smallest, fresh from tending sheep in the middle of nowhere. Sheep aren't known for their good smell. I don't know if you guys have been around sheep. I think some of you have been. You know, when I had the privilege of serving as an elder with other elders there in Longmont, one of the things when we were feeling like, oh, this is a tough situation, they'd nudge me and say, "Do we smell like sheep yet?" Uh, yeah, it's interesting that sheep don't have the smell that goes away. The least respected in the family. David became Israel's second king, the court harpist, a universally known warrior, a poet laureate of history, and a shadow picture for what the Messiah might look like. Interesting. So, why? Because he was handsome? Nope. Tall? Nope. Strong? Maybe strong. Nope. It was because of his heart. Absolutely. Have you seen a scenario like this before in your own secular jobs where the heir apparent looked and sounded the part, but when actually put into the position, fell apart? Have you guys seen that? Boy, I have. I've seen it repeatedly and wondered from afar, sort of like, well, how many ships do you need to run onto the rocks before somebody replaces you as captain? You know, sort of like, how long are we going to do this? So I think we've all seen that. And again, perhaps that person was chosen unwisely, with unwise criteria. But here, the next king was chosen because of his heart. It's interesting. So, one of the things I've learned is that God does not thrust green leaders to the front. He doesn't do that. If he's betting on that leader, it's very likely he is going to put them into many different scenarios. Again, the hammer, the file, and the anvil. Such that when they finally are put into a role where hard things have to happen, and they have to happen in righteousness and being right with God. It's interesting. I've seen it happen, and I depend on it happening. So David's years of being underestimated by his brothers, apparently ignored by his father, and tending sheep made him humble, reachable, and teachable. And those who are destined greatness are willing to learn from all comers. Have you ever noticed that some leaders, you have a raised hand, said, I've got an idea on how we could solve that. And you get 3 words into it. No, that's not going to work. Somebody else raises their hand. Sort of like, well, I thought we might, and boom, that's it. So one of the marks of a good leader, I think, is listening carefully to what everybody has to say. It's important. And the reason for that is that the people that I've seen that were remarkable leaders understood that leadership arises at any level. Really important. How many leaders have you seen that if you will, your rank in whatever other organization you were, determined how long they would listen to you? Have you ever seen that? I have seen it in spades. Just amazing. And it's the antithesis of what we see with David. And that is leadership arises at all levels, even from the lowest in the family. And so when someone has an idea, I think it's attendant upon us to listen, because you may, in fact, be listening to a heart in tune with God. That's really important. Sometimes we miss that because we put certain people on a pedestal, and like Saul was, and they don't exactly perform the way God had intended. So we need to be careful of that. Have any of you seen that in your own life, your own secular pursuits? Well, it doesn't sound like you've seen it, but I can tell you I have. Any comments on this?
Well, I was just gonna, we have seasons in our life. And that's the way David, with him being out with the sheep, he thought that was low, or other people thought it was low. He took that time to start playing the harp
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
calm the sheep down. When that's how, right? If I remember right, that's how he kept everything calm, and that's how he did with Saul, and that was his time to be with himself and learn. That was his season,
Right.
and then of course, he moved up, and then there was more, but I just think we each have our own seasons, just like David.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that we'll see later, and it fits right in with what you said perfectly, is that, David became, even under Saul's command, David became very well known for his relentlessness in battle. In fact, it came to a point where, Saul has killed his hundreds and David has killed his thousands, were chanted by women, welcoming back from battles and things like that. So, like you said, he rose up. And he had a season where he was an amazingly great warrior. But there came a point later on, I don't know if I will adequately cover it later, but I'm going to try, where David was in battle, and he was an old man. And he had forgotten that, he just remembered what battle looked like, and this is what you do, and you just charge in there, and you just sling that sword, and you just have heads falling everywhere, and that's the way battles are won. So he charged in there, but he got surrounded. He got surrounded by the enemy, and he was about to die. And his mighty men, the people later that we'll hear about, rushed in and grabbed him and fought those guys back and said, look, you're too valuable. We're not letting you go into the battle anymore. And so his season of being that amazingly, how can I say, at least heroic to his men and things, came and went, and now he was something, okay, you guys go over there and fight the battle, we're going to get David out of the way. And, that's one of those things that I look at as, no, man, yeah, sometimes I need to get out of the way. It's just one of those things. So you're right about every person has a season, but every person has been given gifts. And those gifts aren't just the ones you start with, those are the ones that you end up with. And so we need to be, how can I say, flexible, maybe in our problem solving. From the standpoint, well, I used to be able to do this and then take care of it right away, but it doesn't seem to be working. Well, we need the skill set that God is going to give us for that specific time. Does that make sense? Have you guys ever felt like God may have put you at the right place, but in the wrong time? Yeah, I think I have a couple of times. But by being patient, most of the folks I think that have seen that, it just resolves itself because God had a plan. It just wasn't immediate, just as in this case. And I must say that I've never waited 40 years for God to show me an open door. I've never had, none of us have. None of us have had that happen. So David's example, I think, is really important. He learned the value of listening humbly. So developing that character, again, the character that the traits of which are so valuable, they're usually developed during times at the bottom of the totem pole. Have you noticed that? Have you learned more? I think I learned more from my first jobs than I learned from my last jobs. It was when you're at the bottom of the totem pole, it just doesn't necessarily work for you to have brilliant ideas, even though leadership arises at all levels. And usually you find out also, well, maybe I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Maybe I need to prepare myself for something else. And I think that's really important. Stan, have you ever, starting at the bottom of the totem pole, you probably started about midway at the bottom of the totem pole, but have you ever looked at it and said, well, here I am. This is what's got to be done, so I'm going to get after it. Yeah, I think you and Butch, if I remember right, had a number of things that you guys went after clearing coal from blasts really, really hard and with great vigor. Is that right? Yeah. And you did it so well, you may have spent the rest of your life at that job, I don't know. But somehow they saw beyond the ability to move coal like there was no tomorrow. There were better things that you might be doing for them, right? Yeah. Yep. Well, that's a good place to start, though, isn't it? I think so. Some of the ideas I had as a young man were so wrong. So it completely disastrously wrong that starting at the bottom of the totem pole was actually the safest place God could put me, without a doubt. The most valuable character traits are usually developed at the bottom of the totem pole. And yet in David's heart, God saw reverence, humility, and integrity, and it was polished by spending time doing what his older brothers were not asked to do. That was one of the points that Jeannie was making. There's a great passage there in Psalms 139 that's worth remembering and reviewing. So, after Saul's arrogant and unproductive leadership, the Israelites desperately needed someone to give them the heart to go on. Things had gone bad under Saul, and God had turned against him. He had left Saul, turned turned his face away from him. And given where Israel was at that time, surrounded by Canaanites, what a terrible thing to suddenly lose God. God was really the only thing keeping him in the game. So, God chose David. So, are we of the same caliber as David? Can we meet some of the high bars that David eventually set? One of the things I like about David, I like about Peter and others, in that feet of clay. David was a man after God's own heart and yet failed miserably on a number of tests. I mean, really bad. It's one of those things that gives me hope that if David can be viewed as a man after God's own heart, maybe there's hope for me and for all of us. Who knows? God knows. Might He choose one of you to give the 21st century downhearted heart to go on? And that's what David did in this instance. I think that is so powerful. Any comments on this before we go to some questions here? Okay, is all this maybe showing you something different, or did you already get it? This is one that we've all read so many times, I think most of us consider it flyover country. You know what I mean? So yeah, I got that. There's more to it than meets the eye, for sure. Yeah.
I didn't realize it was 40 years.
40 years between the time he was anointed and the time he took the throne. God gave him the throne. So part of that was Saul's stubbornness. Part of it was God's plans. Think about this. Think about this. You're going to get an award, and you go to the award ceremony, and they said, "Yep, you got it." And but we'll let you know when we've got the award to give you. And you're kind of smiling and okay. 40 years later, in the mail, there's your award. It's sort of like, wow, I didn't even know, I didn't even remember. So David went through that. So are we so different from the Israelites? Do we want people to look the part? Is that what we're after?
We want to look at party out long amongst other things, but that look is gonna hurt.
Yeah, well, that's where the speed of light, this is the way I think of it. I guess that beady-eyed scientists always will. The speed of light is a lot faster than even the speed of sound. So you see someone before you hear them. And I get that. You certainly see them and hear them before you know much about them. Much of what you've done behind you may not be recorded anywhere for anyone to look up, things like that. But yeah, do we do that?
Don't mean we should, but we do.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we do. So, how have you learned to be faithful in the little things when, one is not looking? He could have run off and not protected the sheep. How have you perfected that in your own lives? Any takers on that one? I think I've done it because I want to somehow remain in good standing with God. That's what righteousness means, being right with God. I don't know, I've never been always right with God and probably never will be. But the desire, the pursuit, the aspiration of being right with God is, I believe, what God is looking for in our hearts. Even if we fail, even if we do things that we should have thought our way through, all of these different things. You guys see it that way, or you see something else? You're taking a deep breath there. None of us are.
but he knows my heart.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good point. If solitude were so helpful in David's preparation for kingship, what might it do for us? Have we ever drawn out and just kind of stayed a little bit silent for a long time? I have, I have two granddaughters that just not going to make it. Not going to make it. They can't be silent for 30 seconds. It's sort of like, but solitude, I think, is where you begin to focus on little things and big things that have to do with what is a priority in our lives. Sometimes we get jostled by all kinds of different events coming and going and things like that, where we are tempted not to come back into clear focus on what really are priorities to us. And I think that's the value of that solitude. So, what are some practical ways you might find solitude for time meditating on who God is and what His expectations are? Do we find ourselves looking for that point in a day where we might do that? Might be really important for us to consider that together. What do you think? Okay, we're done with the class this morning. Do you think this will be a reasonably good study?
Yes.
I hope so, and I'm hoping that we each will learn something we didn't know. I think there's value in looking at things that are sort of flyover parts of the Bible. Yeah, we know that. I know that. It's like Jonah and the fish. Yeah, I got it. But sometimes you need to stop and maybe reread the Bible. It is the living Word. And many times when we reread some flyover chapters in the Bible, we see things that were startlingly absent the last time we read it. And I think that's really good. So we'll do that. Thank you.